Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, January 5th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game is in 239 days. The game against Michigan in 330 days. The AllAmerican game, well, that's this weekend. And Kevin Noon and Mark Givler of BuckeyeHuddle.com are down in San Antonio. They've been covering practices all week in the lead up to that game. 5 Buckeyes down there right now that we're going to be talking about today. And there's a lot to talk about there. Kevin joins me from San Antonio. Kevin, I guess before we get into this, what exactly have you been doing down there all week? What do you actually get to watch them do during the week, and how does that compare in terms of evaluation to the actual game itself?
No, I think the week of practice is very important because when you put together a game like this, all right, we bring you in a couple days in advance and we try to, these are guys you're not used to playing with, and we're going to try and shoehorn an offensive and defensive scheme in there, and hopefully some of these plays work, and we get to the game, and unfortunately it ends up being 14-7 in a game because that's just kind of what happens in all-star games. And there are years that there are outliers and you get some high-scoring affairs. But we get the opportunity to watch. There's your East squad, and then there's your West squad. And the 5 players that we're really talking about are on the East squad. So they're all on the same unit. So we get to watch them go through some positional work. We've had a chance to see one-on-ones with like OLDL, with receiver DB. We've been able to see some 7-on-7. We've been able to see 11-on-11. We've been able to see 7-on-7 in a different way of where you're having where it's more running back focused. A lot of the things you see during camp season, but some of the stuff is not necessarily camp season because I had to think about the day. On Wednesday, they were in full pads, so they were out there and they were hitting. On Thursday, they were out there in shorts, so it was a lot more walkthrough type of stuff. But for evaluation purposes, it's very valuable. Unfortunately, we're kind of at the end of the line in terms of their evaluation. Most of these kids are signed. Most of their star rankings may as well be final, but it's a great opportunity. And for the recruitniks, I mean, this is where a lot of that information comes out of.
And one other way in which it's kind of different than the summer camp season, and the summer camp season is really, really valuable opportunities for us to watch a lot of these guys in person, and you're a little earlier in the cycle, so a lot of those guys are uncommitted or trying to earn an offer a year or more in advance. So that's a little bit different in that way. This is a little bit different in that it's not just the 2 really good guys and then also 300 other kids. This is the All-American game. So, there are a couple of these, so it's not every single one of the top recruits in the nation, but it's a lot of the top recruits in the nation, and you're getting pretty good, good on good reps on this as well. So when someone dominates this setup, that kind of tells you something. And in rather unsurprising news, it sounds, Kevin, like Jeremiah Smith, the number 1 player in the class of 2024 and Ohio State wide receiver signee, is apparently dominating the entire scene yet again this week.
Yeah, I mean, when it's good on good, we're certainly talking about good on good with Jeremiah Smith. And I've had the opportunity through the years to cover a lot of recruiting events and even been at some of the top 100 camps where you have a mix of seniors and juniors, and a guy gets beat on a drill and he's like, well, I'm kind of done with this, and goes to the back of the line and hides over there. But Jeremiah Smith has really kind of victimized all comers when it comes to trying to defend him. All of the skills that made him the number 1 recruit in most of the services are all there. I mean, he's tall, he's long, he's fast. I mean, he's got a giant catch radius, and he's super competitive. I mean, it's not a case of you can sit there and look at him, and he's just kind of got this good-natured smile on his face at a lot of times. It's like, oh, he's going to let up here. And he just doesn't let up. I mean, that ball is his. Every time that ball is in the air, that ball is going to be his. And he's just built different. And it has nothing to do with the physical attributes. I mean, it's a mindset. He really, really, really puts a lot into his craft. And dare I say, we saw somebody else that put a lot in their craft and wore out a Monarch machine, and they had to get a new Monarch machine because of that. I see some similarities in terms of mindset between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith, and that I hate doing comps. I never do comps because it's just not fair to anybody. But I'm doing a comp there because I think, at least in terms of mindset, they're very similar. But I'm going to hate myself for this one, but I'm going to say it too. I think that Jeremiah Smith is more physically gifted. So I think that that's what makes things, so much more crazy for what the future can hold. So now that I've completely said that Jeremiah Smith should have been a 10-star, get me off of this topic before I say anything else I may regret.
Well, I was going to chastise you for making irresponsible comps, but then I also kind of wanted to ask you about other previous Ohio State wide receivers you've seen at these types of events in the past, because obviously this is not your first rodeo there. And I don't remember back, was Garrett Wilson at one of these, or was Marvin Harrison, or was Chris Olave? Have you covered other Ohio State wide receivers to sort of have a baseline for what guys typically look like in this type of setting?
I have. I mean, maybe not the names that you mentioned there, but I've certainly seen Jackson Smith and Jigba in a high school setting. I've seen Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis on the camp settings. I've seen Terry McLaurin. I've seen Paris Campbell. I could go Johnny Dixon. I've seen a lot of these guys. I mean, one of the things I'll say through all the years that I've worked with Mark Givler through various stops is we are not afraid to travel. And if you won't come to Columbus to a camp, and there are not many camps in Columbus outside of Ohio State's camps, we will go and find you. So we have been to Texas, and we have been to Georgia, and we have been to Florida, and have seen these types of guys before. And Jeremiah Smith, and I'm not even saying my words here, Mark Givler has made comments too about just him being maybe the best, certainly best high school receiver that he has seen. And you have to kind of put him in there in the freaks list of the best high school prospect you've ever seen, because he's there. And sometimes it's very easy to get lost in the comparison between a really talented wide receiver and a grown man defensive end or something like that, and how the growth of the defensive end who's all rocked up and it just looks like he's 30. Maybe that stands out more than Jeremiah Smith, who certainly is, he's tall and he's long and he's fast and everything else. But you see a lot of tall, long, fast receivers through the years, but maybe not as talented. But I would say that Jeremiah really, again, at risk of gushing too much, is just different.
All right. So that is at Kevin_Noon on Twitter if you want to yell at him about all the irresponsible things he just said, or tell him how excited you are about all of the things he just said. Either way, the address is the same. So there you go. I had nothing to do with any of the preceding segment other than just asking the question.
If you don't like what I'm saying, I'm at Tom Orr 4.
I just put the ball on the tee. You're the one who swung the club. I'm not here to set any sort of irresponsible expectations for anyone. Let's talk, though, next up about James Peoples, running back who did not have to go very far for this week's All-American game festivities. He is someone who I always am a little hesitant on exactly how much to judge running backs in that sort of camp setting, drill work, that kind of stuff. But he is someone who just physically looks like he's ready to play college football today.
Absolutely. And you want to get him in the weight room, and you want to be able to do some things, but his trunk, his lower body, he's just looks different than the other backs here. And I don't even this is how focused I am on the Ohio State side of things. I don't know who anybody else is at the camp, to be quite honest, because I went from the Cotton Bowl to the All-American Bowl, and that's where I'm at. But he just has a different look. And I haven't necessarily scouted the West team. We've been focused primarily 100% on the East, but he just has the strong lower body, and I think he's somebody who certainly should come in and be very much in the mix. At the time that we're recording this, we do not have official word on Trevion Henderson. So what does Ohio State's running back room look like without Trey? They're going to need all hands on deck and maybe somebody through the portal with Trey. I mean, Peoples doesn't come in any lower than third, in my opinion, with Henderson and with Dallin Hayden coming back on the roster. But we also know that Ohio State seems at times to have moments where it will play freshman backs and where it won't. I mean, I guess if you're J.K. Dobbins, it's cool. If you're Dallin Hayden, we'll see. But Peoples has that look, and I mean, I was talking to somebody on text message while I was supposed to be watching practice, but they were just doing a lot of walking around today. He's like, I'd feel a lot better if he were like 205. I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I think that he's got a good body in what he's doing, and he doesn't necessarily need to be, a short fullback or anything like that. I mean, let's see what they got there. I mean, I'm sure strength and conditioning has a plan for what they want him to be at, what they want him to play at. And I don't think that they're going to have to do a ton of reshaping with him to get him to the point where they want him at come August and however many days, as it was, you said at the beginning of the show, for the Akron game.
All right, now let's move on to the position, I think, of maybe the most concern for Ohio State fans right now, and that is the offensive line. The Buckeyes have brought in one potential transfer offensive lineman from Troy. He's already been in. They're bringing in Alabama's center a little later on this week. So they're very actively pursuing folks in the portal to bolster that offensive line. They've got a pretty deep class this year, and the star of that offensive line class is Ian Moore. He is out of the state of Indiana, so we have not seen him in person a ton outside of camp settings. You have gotten to see him a bunch this week. Obviously, the stipulation up front is you never expect a player to come in and be a starter year one. So this is more of a 2025, 2026 kind of question. But how is Ian Moore looking this week down in San Antonio?
Right. I mean, when Michael Jordan started as a true freshman for Ohio State, that was a big deal. And that's just not the norm. Even when there is the need, you can sit there and really mess a kid up if you throw him out there too quick and he's not ready. I think one of the big questions of Ian Moore is what is his position? He's been repping at guard here. I think Ohio State sees him as a tackle. I mean, he's looked good at guard. I mean, again, we are not necessarily seeing true game action. I mean, we saw 11-on-11 full scrimmage on Wednesday. I'll feel better once I get to watch the game off of the DVR and see a little bit and be able to play a couple of plays back. But big kid. I mean, seems to move pretty well. Not that you're necessarily getting to showcase that in guard where you're playing in space. I think the move to tackle is there for him if that's what is decided upon, and he was certainly recruited as a tackle. A lot of times at these type of games, you're trying to make sure that you have the right configurations to where you can get everybody on the field in positions that fit. I mean, I go back a couple of years ago and George Fitzpatrick was playing out of position when he was here for representing Ohio State, and it just kind of is what it is with that. But I think that they have themselves quite defined there, and when you couple them with the Armstrong twins, I think it's a pretty solid class. And then of course you have Gabe Van Sickle, who is a guard tackle type of guy playing against smaller competition up in the state of Michigan. I think he's the one that has got the boom bust type of potential, and I never like associating the word bust with kids that I cover. That just that's a tough thing to do, but that could end up going down as a tremendous find, or it could be like didn't necessarily work out. So we'll see there, but I've been impressed with Moore, and he's not one of these 370 pounders that's going to UGA. I mean, you sit there and you look at him compared to some of these other guys that are there, and it's like, ooh, he's a little small. And it's like, no, he's not really that small. There are just some dudes there that are ginormous.
Yeah, and Ohio State has seemingly sort of made a point of recruiting the more athletic and not so much the just enormous road grader type offensive lineman. That is an intentional sort of stylistic choice for the program over the last couple of years. So we will see how Ian Moore develops over the next couple of years. On the other side of the ball, you've got a little bit clearer path to the field as a true freshman, potentially, especially if you are someone who is like Edrick Houston, who is a 5-star, 270 pounds, already on the big side, already seemingly probably a little more physically developed in terms of coming in as a defensive end for the Buckeyes. He's someone who we have not heard yet officially on JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer. We did yesterday's show, and we're talking about the fact we were sort of expecting those guys back. And as of the time of recording, they have the top 4 defensive ends from this year's team already back. So is Edrick Houston someone who you see as someone who might be able to get on the field in some form in 2024, or is he maybe a year away?
No, I think he's somebody who's immediately in the mix, because I think Ohio State is at its best when it is rotating guys. I mean, I think that it's important to have your best guys out there in those high leverage positions, at least at first, until your young guys have had the opportunity to do some things like that. But I think that when I look at Ohio State's rotation, I think Edrick is going to be right there. Again, in the camp circuit, and I consider this just kind of the culmination of the camp circuit. You don't necessarily get to see everything when you're at a normal camp. No bull rush, so power guys don't necessarily get to show everything that they're all about. I mean, I think Edrick can knock you over, and I think Edrick can run around you. I think that he's kind of got the full situation going on there. I watched him kind of just, having a little horseplay with Ohio State linebacker commit Garrett Stover, and he was messing around with Ian Moore. I mean, first of all, he's funny. I never have really had a chance to talk to him. When Mark and I went down to Buford several months ago, I spoke to a couple other players. Mark got to speak to Edrick, and it was like after a spring game, and not really a joking moment, but God, he was cracking jokes, making fun of James Peoples being short and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think he's going to be a well-liked kid in the locker room, I guess, unless he's making fun of you. But outside of that, I think he's going to be a well-liked kid there, but I think he's going to be well-liked by the coaches, because he is, I mean, there's a reason he's a 5-star. They don't hand out 5 stars like candy, and he's earned it. He's earned it, I mean, just with all of his abilities, and I think that just being able to get in and not only work with the coaches. I mean, you get to work with the coaches X amount of times, but, he's going to get to work with guys, and hopefully, if you're an Ohio State fan, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, work with them on hands and some things like that. I think as he's able to put some more weapons into his arsenal, I mean, he could be downright scary. Now, of course, Ohio State has this unrealistic expectation of, well, are you the next Bosa, or Young? I don't think anybody really knew what Ohio State had in its first Bosa, or even in Young. I mean, I think everybody kind of had an expectation for Nick because they'd seen Joey. You don't know necessarily when that's going to strike, but I think that Edrick is one of the more talented defensive ends that I've seen in the last decade plus.
All right, and finally, you mentioned Garrett Stover, of course, the younger cousin of Cade Stover. Cade Stover in high school played safety. He played running back, and those were just about the only 2 places he did not play as a Buckeye. If I remember correctly, he went tight end, defensive end, linebacker, back to tight end at the end of his career. Garrett Stover sounds like he's going to start his career as a Buckeye as a linebacker. Didn't he play safety in high school? I mean, he's sort of following the same, you're going to bulk up, you're going to be playing a little closer to the line of scrimmage. He's sort of following the same general path as his cousin Cade, though maybe with fewer twists and turns on the way.
And I think one of the things with Garrett that you have to remember, too, is he's learning a new position. I mean, he has had the opportunity at Big Walnut to play linebacker, but he also has a lot of experience playing safety. And while there's some things that obviously, football's football and some things carry over, I mean, there are different responsibilities at each position and certainly at each level, and moving down a level to linebacker, there are going to be some things there. He's been kind of a sponge. He's been talking a lot to the coaches about, they go through a drill and it's like, okay, and I can't necessarily hear what's being said, and that's not necessarily for me to get in and try and listen. I'd probably be escorted off the premises if I were getting into the huddle in the first place. But I think that he's making the most of this situation and trying to get as much knowledge before he reports here in a couple days, with January 7th being the big report date for the early enrollees. But I think one of the biggest things that he has got to learn is he is so hyper aggressive on the field, and that's not hyper aggressive and like violent tendencies and anything like that. It's hyper aggressive in over pursuit, and I think that he's got to learn once he gets to Ohio State, what his role is, what are the expectations, not go out there and try and make every play, because a lot of times you go to a school and you see the best player out there is trying to make every play, because that's just kind of how it works. And, he's going to be around 10 other guys who were like probably the best player on their team as well. And it's all kind of have to fit together. But I've been very impressed with Garrett. And I'll tell a story that I was talking to Mark about. I have tried on every instance on this trip to talk to Garrett Stover, just because I know how much Cade Stover hated talking to us. So if I can get in and at least normalize relationships with Garrett, I've got maybe 6-7 months before I get completely shut out.
It'll be fun when we'll hopefully get to talk to him and the rest of the early enrollees at some point after they show up. As you said, they're expected to show up on Sunday the 7th. And then hopefully sometimes, usually, we get a chance to talk to those guys sort of towards the end of February, or end of January, early February, as they start going through off-season conditioning and then heading into spring ball. And oh boy, we are turning the calendar over yet again. It is a new season, a new year of Ohio State football, and the best place to follow along with all of that is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Kevin and Mark and Tony and Ross and Justin and Devin and Mickey, everyone there, making you a smarter football fan, covering the team, covering recruiting, covering the X's and O's. Really fun, active board as well. Lots of stuff to talk about this week with the transfer portal and NFL draft decisions coming up and much, much more. That's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And I will also plug, they have, Kevin and Mark have done some really, really good interviews down there in San Antonio that you can find on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. I will put in a special plug for the James Peoples one. That was a great interview. But check all that content out at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.